Welcome back to our news bulletin. In Afghanistan, 3 people have been killed and 11 others injured in a bombing in the eastern Khost province. Police say a motorcycle rigged with a bomb exploded during a football match. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack yet. More in this report.
The Taliban have announced the end of the partial truce agreed on with the United States last month. This comes after Afghan President Ashraf Ghani refused to free Taliban prisoners. The US Taliban deal calls for up to 5,000 jailed Taliban prisoners to be released in exchange for 1,000 Afghan government captives. But Ghani said his government made no commitment to free detainees. In response, the Taliban say they will not participate in the intra-Afghan talks until their prisoners are released. The group said they will not target the foreign troops as per the agreement, but operations against Afghan security forces will continue.
Pakistan says any reservations Kabul has with Islamabad should be resolved bilaterally rather than involving the US. In an interview, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi talked about the Doha deal clause of US facilitating talks between 2 states. Qureshi said a trust deficit between 2 countries has existed and Pakistan has done its best to bridge this gap. Discussing the Doha agreement, he said the deal will never have happened without Pakistan's role and emphasis on a political solution. The foreign minister said Afghanistan should talk directly to Pakistan as the US is planning to withdraw, as the two will always remain neighbors.
So a direct approach should be given preference to. If I have an issue with Afghanistan, I will not ask Washington to play a role. I will speak to Kabul directly.
For more on this, we are joined by Hamdullah Hamdar, the political analyst from Kabul, Afghanistan. Thank you for joining us. Now, Mr. Hamdar, the Taliban have said that they will not participate in the intra-Afghan talks until their prisoners are released under the deal signed with the US. How can the intra-Afghan dialogue achieve a peace in this complex situation?
I believe that Taliban's deal with the US will be implementable and it will be practical only if they first agree to talk with the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Once the Afghan government and the Taliban agree on the intra-Afghan peace talks, then they can go for releasing Taliban fighters or the Taliban prisoners, and also Taliban can release the prisoners of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. I believe as long as there is no understanding and no agreement between the Afghan government and Taliban, only the agreement between the US and the Taliban will not be something implementable by the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, as it will question the independence of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And President Ghani may be looking forward to having an agreement with the Taliban on the intra-Afghan peace talks initiation.
Mr. Hamdullah, now building up on your statement, only the agreement with US and Taliban can't move the agreement forward if Afghan government isn't considered in the process. However, if the intra-Afghan talks fail to start, how will it impact the recent US-Taliban deal, keeping in view that the US is going to the elections in November?
We all know that the US is trying its best, especially Donald Trump is trying his best to have achievements for the presidential elections, to have some strong statements during the presidential campaigns. However, the peace deal will be able to go forward or to be implemented between the US and Taliban and also the Afghan government only when the Afghan government and the Taliban agree to start the intra-Afghan peace talks. However, if the Taliban deny to start the intra-Afghan peace talks with the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, I believe it will not be implementable, and then it will also have adverse effects on the US presidential campaigns for the Donald Trump. And therefore, I believe that Taliban should show some flexibility, and they should start the intra-Afghan peace talks. They should agree to talk with the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and should not avoid it or should not reject talking with the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. The conditions that they have set out in the MOU or Memorandum of Understanding that they have signed with Zalmay Khalilzad that is something that is questioning the independence of the Afghan government. If the Afghan government have agreed with Zalmay Khalilzad and with Taliban to put this statement or to put this condition or article in that memorandum of understanding, then it's okay, I guess, if there is a pre-understanding or agreement of the Afghan government. Otherwise, something that is decided or agreed upon between Zalmay Khalilzad and the Taliban, that is something that is implementable by both of them, but Afghan government will not be, they are not responsible for implementing that. If the agreement is sought before, then it will work, and I guess they will proceed with the agreement implementation, and Donald Trump will also have an achievement for his presidential campaigns, and he can make some strong statements there to get more votes for bringing peace back to Afghanistan and for starting the return of the international troops, especially the American troops, back to their countries.
That was Hamdullah Hamdard, political analyst from Kabul, Afghanistan, talking to us about US-Taliban peace deal. Thank you for your time. Now, moving on, Saudi Arabia's Deputy Defense Minister Prince Khalid bin Salman has appreciated Pakistan's efforts for peace in the region. In a meeting with Prime Minister Imran Khan in Islamabad, Salman said his country wants to strengthen ties with Pakistan. The two leaders also discussed the human rights situation in occupied Kashmir, which is under a curfew for nearly 7 months. Prime Minister Imran Khan said Muslims are being persecuted under Narendra Modi's government in India. Earlier in Rawalpindi, Salman met Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa and praised the Pakistan Army's professional capabilities. General Bajwa thanked the visiting dignitary for acknowledging Islamabad's contributions to regional peace and stability. Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Special Envoy for Jammu and Kashmir, Ambassador Yusuf M. Al Dubai, will arrive in Pakistan today. The visit comes amid a curfew and communications blackout in occupied Kashmir for 211 days. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said Dubai will also visit Azad Jammu and Kashmir during his 5-day visit. It said the envoy and his 6-member delegation will be briefed on the deteriorating human rights situation in the occupied valley. The ministry said the delegation will also visit the line of control to get first-hand knowledge of the loss of lives and property caused by the indiscriminate firing of Indian forces. The OIC and its Independent Permanent Human Rights Commission have repeatedly condemned India's actions in the valley. India's fascist tactics continue as the death toll in riots during citizenship law protests in the capital, New Delhi, has risen to 46. Police said 3 more bodies were recovered from the city's violence-hit northeast. Officials claim the situation was under control, but police and paramilitary remain deployed in the affected parts. A trail of damage can be seen in northeastern parts of the city after rioters torched vehicles, vandalized shops and burnt buildings. Many Muslims have left their homes in the affected areas and taken refuge in shelters set up by the government. Over 350 have also been wounded after Hindu radicals targeted mosques, Muslims' homes and shops under the ruling BJP government's nose. So far, the violence against the controversial citizenship law has killed over 70 people across India. Condemning Indian government's aggression, over 350 academics from around the world have signed a strongly worded statement against the riots in the Indian capital, New Delhi. In a joint statement, the academics blame fascist upper caste Hindutva forces for the deaths during the clashes. The academics called the violence an anti-Muslim pogrom, eerily similar to the RSS modus operandi in Gujarat riots. They said there is a difference between the violence of these fanatical mobs and attempts made to defend one's life, family and home. The authors also recalled the violence follows a spate of attacks on university students in the city. They accused Delhi police of being complicit in the violence and acting in near-perfect coordination with right-wing mobs. Meanwhile, protests against the riots were held in 16 European cities, including Paris, Brussels, Berlin and Glasgow. In another effort to distort history, India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party wants to rename 2 more cities to Hindu names. In 2018, BJP-ruled Uttar Pradesh state changed the name of Allahabad city to Prayagraj and Mughal Sarai Junction to Upadhyaya. In Maharashtra, BJP has asked the state government to rename city of Aurangabad as Sambhaji Nagar, a Maratha king. BJP state president Chandrakant Patel said Hindus are descendants of Sambhaji Maharaj and not of Mughal emperor Aurangzeb. Meanwhile, a BJP office bearer in Uttar Pradesh has sought to change the name of Ghazipur district to Ghadipuri. In news on Idlib crisis, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan hopes a ceasefire deal on Syria will be reached at his meeting with his Russian counterpart. In a televised speech, Erdogan said he will go to Moscow on Thursday to discuss the situation with Vladimir Putin.
Talks between Erdogan and Putin follow a surge in fighting between Turkish and Syrian forces in northwestern Syria. Tensions have escalated after Turkish drones killed 19 Syrian troops and downed 2 government jets in Idlib. However, Erdogan is hopeful that the tensions will de-escalate after the Moscow meeting.
I will go to Moscow on Thursday to discuss the developments in Syria with Mr. Putin. I hope that he will take the necessary measures there, such as a ceasefire, and that we will find a solution to this affair.
Turkish president has once again vowed to keep the doors open for refugees heading to Europe.
After we opened the doors, there were multiple calls saying close the doors. I told them it's done, it's finished. The doors are now open. Now you will have to take your share of the burden.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin says Moscow will cooperate with Ankara to find a peaceful solution to the Syrian conflict.
For more on this, we are joined by Can Hasasu, a political analyst from Istanbul, Turkey. Thank you for joining us. Now, Mr. Hasasu, in northwestern Syria, Turkey has created a de facto no-fly zone after downing 2 Syrian jets and destroying anti-aircraft systems. Will Turkey be able to sustain these measures now?
Well, actually, so far, Turkey is retaliating to the latest Syrian regime attack on its forces inside the Idlib area. As you may remember, on 27th of the previous month, Syrian jets bombarded an area which was garrisoned by Turkish soldiers, and Turkey lost 34 of its soldiers. So in retaliation to that, they are conducting the biggest operation inside Idlib inside Syria against Syrian forces. And they are hitting their every possible target for the regime, including their air forces, which were the source of the damage or the attack that targeted the Turkish soldiers. So far, it's not internationally agreed like an air zone, but Turkey is not going to let its forces to be under the threat of the Syrian air forces until they meet with the Russians and agree on some solid deal in the region.
Now, Mr. Hasasu, you've said that Turkey is conducting its biggest operation in Idlib right now. However, as the fighting escalates, President Erdogan is going to Moscow on Thursday to meet with President Putin. Can the 2 sides agree on a lasting ceasefire?
Well, Turkey from the beginning is trying to open its communication channels with every counterpart, including the deal that they made with the Americans, and now the problem that they are facing in Syria and the problems that they are facing in their relationship with the Russians, not only in Syria but Libya as well. Turkey is trying to continue to communicate with their Russian counterparts. And this meeting between Erdogan and Putin will be just one of these meetings, and in the highest level. And Turkey is really trying to reach a deal before it goes in another clash in the region with the Syrian forces forces, or maybe a possibility of having a clash with the Russian forces as well. But Turkey really wants to solve its problems first with diplomatic ways, but it shows that it is ready to use its armed forces as well if needed.
Turkey is trying to reach a deal for the Idlib situation to deteriorate. That was Istanbul-based analyst Can Hasasu. Thank you for your time. Now, in a related development, the EU has called an extraordinary meeting of its Foreign Affairs Council next week to discuss the continuing developments in Idlib. In a statement, the EU's top diplomat Josep Borrell said renewed fighting in Idlib is a serious threat to international peace and security. Borrell said the fighting is causing untold human suffering beside its grave impact on the region. He said the Foreign Affairs Council meeting was called at the request of Greek Foreign Minister. Borrell said the EU must redouble efforts to address the terrible human crisis. The top diplomat said the Syrian regime must urgently re-engage in a political process under the auspices of the UN. Tensions in Idlib escalated sharply last week when 34 Turkish soldiers were killed in an airstrike. Meanwhile, Ankara says over 80,000 migrants have crossed into Europe from Turkey's northwestern borders so far. The Turkish presidency's communication director Fahrettin Altun says the number may increase due to unprecedented displacement in Syria. The presidency says Syria's migration challenge isn't only Turkey's problem, but that of the entire region, as well as Europe and the rest of the world. After Turkey announced it will no longer stop migrants from going to Europe, thousands of refugees gathered near the Pazarkul border gate. Meanwhile, Greece has blocked any new asylum applications for the next month following Ankara's decision. Greek officials said they have stopped nearly 10,000 migrants crossing the land border with Turkey.
The National Security Council, which met today, has decided on the following. Firstly, the guarding of the country's eastern land and sea borders by the armed and security forces has been upgraded to the highest level in order to prevent illegal entry into the country. Secondly, the temporary suspension of all asylum applications from today and for 1 month for all those who entered the country illegally.
We're taking a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. In Baghdad, 2 rockets have crashed near the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad's Green Zone. Security officials say no casualties were caused by the attack. This is the 20th such attack against U.S. assets since October. In December, a rocket had hit a military base in northern Iraq, killing a U.S. civilian contractor. None of the attacks have been claimed, but the U.S. has blamed Iran-backed groups within Hashd al-Shaabi frequently in the past. Meanwhile, Iraqi Prime Minister-designate Mohammad Alawi has withdrawn his candidacy for the post and accused political parties of obstructing him. This is the second time Parliament has refused to approve Alawi's cabinet. The rejection comes against a background of political infighting, deepening domestic crisis, and an unprecedented power vacuum. Since October, mass protests are underway in Iraq against the country's political system, which is deemed corrupt. Alawi said he took his decision because some political factions were not serious about reform or fulfilling their pledges to the people.
I tried by all possible means to save Iraq from drifting to the unknown and to solve the current crisis. But during negotiations, I faced many matters. I faced many things that are irrelevant to the issue of the homeland and its interest. I swear to God, I didn't surrender and I didn't put my own interest above the country's ones. Regrettably, some parties were negotiating only for getting their interest without paying heed to the national issue and without any consideration to the blood of martyrs.
For more on this, we are joined by Mohammad Hussain, political analyst from Baghdad, Iraq. Thank you for joining us. Now, the Iraqi Prime Minister-designate Mohammad Alawi has withdrawn his candidacy for the post and accused political parties of obstructing him. What is the current situation on ground?
Interest. I swear to God, I didn't surrender and I didn't
We've lost connection with our analysts, so we'll move on with our bulletin. Now, Israelis are voting in the country's third general election in less than a year as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fights for his political survival. After 2 failed attempts to form a government, the country has been plunged into political chaos, being led by interim administration. 2 previous rounds of voting, one last April and a second in September, could not break the deadlock. This report has details.
In a bid to reclaim power, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is once again facing off against his former army chief of staff, Benny Gantz. Charged with bribery, breach of trust and fraud, Netanyahu has been in office from 1996 to 1999 and again from 2009 onwards. Polls suggest neither side will have enough seats in Israel's parliament to end the crisis, and the country may be dragged into yet another months-long election cycle regardless.
Do you see this? This is the truth. Gantz cannot achieve a government without Tibi. He can't. This is a fact. It's a mathematical fact, not some other fact. This is the truth. And people try to hide this truth. And I ask you to tell this truth. Because what's at stake is huge. We are within touching distance from a great victory.
Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party and Gantz's centrist Blue and White party are the main contenders. Hoping to dislodge Netanyahu in the election, Gantz has based his entire election campaign on Netanyahu's corruption indictment and a call to form a secular government.
We want to form a unity government based on secular parties like Kahol Lavan, Likud, Israel Betenu, maybe Labour. But from there on, we have the principles, we have the outlines, we have the framework. Everybody will be welcome to join us.
No single party has ever won an outright majority in an Israeli election. If Gantz-led Blue and White edges out Likud, it will require support from other lawmakers to form a government.
North Korea has fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles into its eastern sea to resume weapons demonstrations after a month-long break. State media said leader Kim Jong-un also supervised an artillery drill to test the combat readiness of units in frontline and eastern areas. In a statement, South Korea's military said the missiles were fired over the sea from the Wonsan area on the east coast and flew 240 kilometers. The statement said the South's military is monitoring for additional launches and maintaining readiness. The move comes as nuclear negotiations with the US are at a standstill. Kim has vowed to boost Pyongyang's nuclear deterrence in response to the US sanctions and pressure. Meanwhile, Beijing has called for a dialogue to promote the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. In Iran, the health ministry spokesman reports 12 more deaths from the new coronavirus, raising the death toll to 66. In a televised speech, he said there were 523 new cases of infected people in the last 24 hours, increasing the total number to 1,501. The latest casualties include a member of the Iranian Supreme Leader's Advising Council, making him the first top official to succumb to the illness. Expediency Council member Mohammad Miro Mahdi became the first top official to succumb to the illness. Iran has the highest death toll in the world after China. Across the wider Middle East, there are over 1,680 cases of the new coronavirus, including Iran. The majority of regional cases are linked back to Iran. Over 3,000 people around the world have died from the new coronavirus, while over 60 countries have been affected. Meanwhile, China has recorded its lowest number of new infections over 24 hours. But in Italy, the total jumped 50% in a day, rising to nearly 1,700. More in this report.
As the progress of coronavirus in China has slowed, the rest of the world has seen a sharp increase in infections. France now has 130 coronavirus cases, which means it has the second highest number of cases in Europe after Italy. But the health authorities in Paris say there is no need for drastic measures.
So I believe that today there are no drastic measures to be taken, and we will take the measures as and when they are appropriate to the situation. However, we are not currently taking such measures, such as the closure of large establishments, since the epidemiological situation does not require it. We must therefore assure our fellow citizens, reassure the people who work.
The US has reported its second coronavirus death, despite President Donald Trump's claim that the country was prepared for the outbreak. Meanwhile, South Korea is still struggling to contain the epidemic, with its case total rising to over 4,000.
The worst case scenario would be discovering more confirmed cases. I can't say if that would happen, but the hope is that we can diagnose people as soon as possible and get the situation under control.
The World Health Organization has asked countries to stock up on ventilators, saying oxygen therapy is a major treatment intervention for coronavirus patients.
In the Philippines, a sacked security guard who shot one person and took 30 others hostage at a Manila shopping mall has surrendered to the authorities. The surrender has ended a day-long standoff that terrified shoppers and drew a massive police response. The guard walked out of the mall where he was allowed to speak briefly to the press before heavily armed officers tackled him and arrested him. He complained about being mistreated by his employers. Hostages were also led out of the building, but police did not say whether any of them had been hurt. Earlier, authorities worked for hours to convince him to surrender. In Bangladesh, police have killed 7 Rohingya men suspected of being members of a criminal gang. The incident occurred near Cox's Bazar, where hundreds of Rohingya refugees fleeing persecution in nearby Myanmar have taken refuge. Police say they've confiscated firearms and ammunition from the scene and are continuing search operations, but they failed to specify what crimes the deceased were involved in. A police spokesman said officers came under fire as they were preparing to launch a raid against criminal gangs operating near Cox's Bazar. However, they did not suffer any casualties. 50 Rohingya people have been killed in shootouts with the police since refugees began pouring into Bangladesh from Myanmar in 2017. In the U.S. Democratic presidential primary, former Indiana Mayor Peter Buttigieg has dropped out of the race after a poor showing in South Carolina. Buttigieg's decision came ahead of this week's Super Tuesday, when 14 states will vote for the Democratic primary. Buttigieg said he will do everything in his power to ensure a Democratic win in November's election. He served as the mayor of Indiana City between 2012 and January this year and has also served as a U.S. Navy intelligence officer. After finishing a distant third in the Nevada caucuses, Buttigieg came in 4th on Saturday in South Carolina, winning support from just 3% of voters.
One of those values is truth, and today is a moment of truth. After a year of going everywhere, meeting everyone, defying every expectation, seeking every vote, the truth is that the path has narrowed to a close for our candidacy, if not for our cause. And another of those values is responsibility.
In the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has vowed to drive a hard bargain with the US in post-Brexit trade talks. London will set out its negotiating position today. Johnson said the transatlantic trade deal will reflect the unique closeness between the two great nations. The UK government said a deal will boost bilateral trade by over $19.5 billion. London said manufacturers of cars, ceramics and professional services, including architects and lawyers, will be among the biggest winners. The US is Britain's largest trading partner after the EU, accounting for nearly 19% of all exports in 2018 and 11% of imports. Meanwhile, talks between the UK and the EU aimed at reaching a trade agreement will formally kick off in Brussels today. Australian summers are now effectively twice as long as its winters. Research released in the wake of the country's unprecedented fire season shows climate change has increased temperature since the middle of the last century. This report has more.
In the last 20 years, summer across most of Australia has been on average 1 month longer than half a century ago. At the same time, winter has contracted by an average of 3 weeks. A report by the Australia Institute, a Canberra-based think tank, has compared data from the past 2 decades with mid-20th century temperature benchmarks.
This summer, as we once knew it, is occurring much earlier than December and is finishing much later than February. On average across Australia, summer is now 31 days longer. And this, in a sense, is just one way of presenting what climate change, what climate impacts actually look like on a cultural level.
Scientists have warned increased temperatures and heat waves will create more dangerous fire seasons and severe weather events.
So in addition to getting longer, they're also getting hotter, and with that comes some serious consequences around extreme heat. If we recall, extreme heat is already the largest killer of Australians of all natural hazards. In fact, it takes out more Australians than all of the natural hazards put together.
The report was released as Australia counts the cost of a devastating and lengthy bushfire season. It burned nearly 12 million hectares of bushland, killed 33 people, and an estimated 1 billion native animals.
We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. China's manufacturing activity has contracted in February, recording the lowest reading since the survey began in 2004. Business media group Asian Market says China's Purchasing Managers Index sank to 40 points, defying economists' forecast of a moderate drop. It said the new coronavirus plus a government-imposed factory shutdown has weighed heavily on production and new orders. The 50-point mark separates expansion from contraction on a monthly basis. On Saturday, the National Bureau of Statistics said China's official PMI fell to an all-time low 35 in February. In Europe, stock markets are trading higher after major central banks pledged for a coordinated global monetary policy. They took the decision in response to mitigate economic impact of coronavirus outbreak. London's FTSE 100 is trading nearly 3% higher as transport giant TU shares climb 6.5%. CAC 40 in Paris and Frankfurt's DAX have gained over 1.5% each. In Asia, Shanghai Composite led the gains, closing over 3% higher. Nikkei 225 and Seoul's Kospi gained ground. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained nearly 4%. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.